Listen to me, right now, before you watch another single video on this platform. I need you to picture this scene because it is happening to thousands of drivers across America this week, in 2026, right at this very moment. You walk out to your driveway on a cold morning, you see it. That black, oily, sinister pool of fluid pooling underneath your car. Your stomach drops, your heart sinks into your shoes, you pop the hood with shaking hands, and what you see is a horror movie. The entire back of your engine block, that massive, beautiful piece of forged aluminum or cast iron, is completely drenched. It is glistening. It is coated in thick, hot, burning motor oil that is smoking and steaming because it has been baking onto the exhaust manifold. The smell hits your nostrils. That acrid, hot, burning oil smell that fills the cabin every time you stop at a red light. You think to yourself, this is it. The engine is dead. My car is finished. So you do what any rational human being does in 2026. With inflation crushing your wallet and grocery bills already destroying your budget, you tow it to the dealership, the Stealership. And the service advisor, this guy in the pressed shirt with the fake smile, he comes out, he gives you the long, sad face, and he delivers the death sentence. He says, "Sir, ma'am, I am so sorry to tell you this, but your engine block has developed a hairline crack, or your structural oil pan has completely failed. We are going to have to pull the entire engine out of the vehicle to even diagnose the source." The quote, $1,200. Minimum. Just for the labor. Just to drop the engine. Parts not included. And that number, that $1,200 number, that is the floor. By the time they are done with you, you are looking at $3,000, $4,000, sometimes $7,000 in repairs. For what? For a $5 piece of rubber. I am going to say that again because I want it to sink into your bones. A $5 piece of rubber. The dealerships making billions of dollars a year off of your panic, off of your oil leak fear, they want you to believe that engine blocks just spontaneously crack open like cheap eggs. They do not. It is not happening. It is basic thermal degradation of rubber elastomers, and they know it. They have known it for decades. But as always, I have to say this for the lawyers. I am sharing this information today for educational purposes only. This is historical observation of mechanical engineering principles. What you choose to do with this knowledge in your own garage, on your own vehicle, is entirely up to you. But knowledge, real knowledge, the kind they do not want you to have, that is the most dangerous weapon a working-class person can own in 2026. Let me explain to you exactly why this cracked block diagnostic is the biggest lie in the automotive service industry right now. Japanese engineers, going all the way back to the 70s and 80s, when Toyota and Honda and Nissan were building engines that would run for 400,000 miles without complaint, they figured something out that Detroit refused to acknowledge for 40 years. They figured out that forged aluminum, when properly heat-treated and cast under high pressure, creates a crystalline structure inside the metal that is essentially indestructible under normal operating loads. The famous Toyota V6, the 1MZ, the 2GR, these engine blocks have a tensile strength that exceeds the operating pressure inside the cylinder by a factor of nearly 20 to 1. 20 to 1. That means for an engine block to crack from internal pressure alone, you would need to be running 20 times the normal combustion pressure, which is physically impossible without melting the pistons first. Engine blocks do not crack. They just do not. The only way a modern Japanese engine block cracks is if you run it bone dry of coolant, completely overheat it to red-hot temperatures, and then dump cold water on it, which causes thermal shock fracturing, and even then, it is extremely rare. So when the service advisor at the Stealership tells you your block is cracked, he is either lying to you intentionally, or he is so poorly trained that he has no business holding a wrench. Either way, you are the one paying the price. The same principle applies to the structural oil pan. On most Japanese vehicles, the oil pan is a stamped steel or cast aluminum piece that is bolted to the block with anywhere from 15 to 22 bolts, sealed with either a reusable rubber gasket or a bead of liquid sealant. These oil pans do not just fail. They do not crack open. They are protected from below by skid plates and from above by the entire weight of the engine. For one to truly fail structurally, you would need to slam it into a curb at 30 miles an hour or hit a deer with the undercarriage. And here is what they will never tell you. Rubber. Rubber is the weakest link in your entire engine. Every single rubber gasket, every O-ring, every seal in your car, it is made of an elastomer, which is essentially a long chain of polymer molecules that, when fresh, are flexible, soft, springy, and capable of compressing into tiny gaps to create a watertight, oil-tight seal under pressure. But rubber has an enemy. That enemy is heat combined with time. Your engine operates at internal temperatures between 220 and 240 degrees Fahrenheit all day, every day, for years on end. Every single thermal cycle, every time you start the engine cold and bring it up to operating temperature and then shut it off and let it cool, that elastomer expands and contracts. Over 100,000 miles, over 10 years of driving, that rubber slowly bleeds out its plasticizers, the chemical compounds that keep it soft. The rubber hardens, it shrinks, it loses elasticity, and eventually it cracks. If you are still with me this far into the video, if you are tired of mechanics condemning your entire engine over a $5 piece of rubber that any 12-year-old kid could replace in his driveway with a single wrench, then I need you to hit that like button right now. Smash it. Because the algorithm is suppressing this kind of content. The engine replacement lobby, the parts distributors, the dealership service industry, they do not want this video being seen, so engagement matters. Tell me in the comments below, has a Stealership ever told you that your engine block was cracked? Has a service advisor ever quoted you over $1,000 to drop your engine for an oil leak diagnostic? I want to hear your story. The comment section is the field report. That is where we share intel. Now let me walk you through exactly how the Stealership executes this $1,200 scam. You bring your car in. The technician, who is paid by flat rate, meaning he gets paid more for bigger jobs, he opens the hood. He sees the oil-soaked back of the engine. And here is the critical moment. He does not clean the engine. He does not degrease it. He does not pressure wash it and run a UV dye test to find the actual source of the leak. Why? Because if he did that, he would find the truth in about 15 minutes. And 15 minutes of honest labor does not pay his mortgage. Instead, he gestures at the giant oily mess and tells the service writer, "This thing is leaking from everywhere. It has to be the block or the pan. We need to pull the engine." And the service writer, who is paid on commission, writes up a $1,200 labor quote, plus $1,000 for a new oil pan, plus $400 for gaskets, plus $150 for shop supplies, plus another $500 if they damage anything on the way back together, which they will. You are looking at $3,000 before you even leave the lot. And here is the most insulting part. After they spend 15 hours of labor pulling that engine out, after they bill you for it, they are going to put it on the engine stand, they are going to look at it, and they are going to find exactly what I am about to tell you about. They are going to find a tiny 80mm housing bolted to the side of the block with a hardened, shriveled rubber gasket inside it. And they are going to replace that $5 gasket, and they are going to charge you $3,000 for the privilege. That is the structural failure illusion. That is how gravity becomes their best salesman. Because oil, when it leaks from anywhere high on the engine, it does not just stay there, it runs. It flows downward, coating every surface in its path, dripping onto the exhaust, smoking, smelling, terrifying you. By the time it pools on the ground, it looks like the bottom of the engine is the source. It is not. It almost never is. Let me get into the actual science of why this happens. The part we are talking about is called the oil filter housing. On most modern Toyotas, Lexus vehicles, many Hondas, certain Nissans, and even some European cars, the oil filter is not the old-school spin-on canister you remember from your grandfather's truck. It is a cartridge-style filter that sits inside a housing bolted directly to the side or the front of the engine block. This housing has two main rubber seals. One large O-ring that seals the cap to the housing, and one figure-8 shaped gasket that seals the housing to the engine block itself. That figure-8 gasket, that is the killer. It is a small piece of rubber, no bigger than a coin, but it has to seal against 60 pounds per square inch of pressurized hot motor oil being pumped through the engine at full operating temperature. When that rubber is fresh, it sits in the groove, gets compressed by the bolts, and forms a perfect seal. But after 100,000 miles of thermal cycling, after 10 years of cooking at 240 degrees, that rubber undergoes a process called thermal degradation. The polymer chains break down. The plasticizers evaporate. The rubber transforms from a soft, pliable elastomer into a hard, brittle plastic. It shrinks, it loses its compression, and a gap forms, even a 1mm gap. That is all it takes, because oil under 60 psi of pressure, when it finds a 1mm gap, it does not just seep out, it sprays, it atomizes. It coats every surface within a foot of the leak source. And gravity does the rest, pulling it down across the back of the block, across the bell housing, across the transmission, onto the exhaust manifold where it smokes and burns, and finally dripping onto your driveway. That is your gravity leak. That is your structural failure illusion. A 1mm gap in a hardened rubber seal, multiplied by 60 psi, multiplied by 10 years of neglect, equals a $1,200 diagnostic at the dealership. Here is how you fix it yourself. In your own garage, for less than the cost of a fast food meal. First, you locate the oil filter housing. On most vehicles, it is on the front of the engine, sometimes on the side, usually accessible from the top of the engine bay. It has the oil filter cap on it, which you can spot because it has a hex shape or a cap wrench fitting. Second, before you touch anything, you take a can of brake cleaner or engine degreaser, you spray down the entire back of the engine block, you wipe it clean with shop rags, and you run the engine for 10 minutes. Watch where the fresh oil appears. That is your leak source. That is your proof. 9 times out of 10, you will see fresh oil weeping out from the seam where the oil filter housing meets the engine block. Third, you drain the oil. You unbolt the housing with a 12 millimeters or 14 millimeters socket, usually 3 or 4 bolts. You pull the housing off. You pry out the old, hardened, shriveled figure-8 gasket with a small pick. You install the new soft rubber gasket, which costs anywhere from $5 to $15 at any parts store. You bolt the housing back up to spec, usually about 12 foot-pounds. Do not over-tighten it. You refill your oil. You start the engine. The leak is gone. Permanently. 20 minutes of work. $5 in parts. A $1,200 dealership bill avoided. This is the kind of suppressed mechanical knowledge that the service industry has been burying for decades, and in 2026, with the cost of living crushing every working family in this country, you cannot afford to keep handing over your paycheck to people who are lying to you. Subscribe to this channel and hit the bell notification before the engine replacement lobby finds a way to get us shut down. Share this video with anyone you know who owns a Japanese car with over 100,000 miles, because that gasket is already failing. They just do not know it yet. Hold on to your tools, trust the engineering, and never, ever let a Stealership tell you your engine block is cracked without making them prove it with a die test. That is the survival skill of 2026. I will see you on the